I committed myself at that point to learning more about restorative justice and restorative practices. And fortunately, in our community in Colorado Springs, there were a number of people who were exploring this concept. I live in a small community called Manitou Springs, right at the foot of Pikes Peak, and it is a wonderful community. We're nestled into a little box canyon. We have a 14,000-foot peak right above us that watches over us, and it was also known as sacred land, sacred ground. The Indians used to come to Manitou Springs to take the waters. We have mineral water that bubbles up from our ground. We have about maybe a dozen or so mineral springs of a variety of mineral contents. And the Indians used to come and lay down their arms to take the waters, the healing waters of Manitou Springs. It was really a powerful place. And I've really enjoyed living there. But I think what it's done for me is it's given me an appreciation that we need to really understand each other. We need to, I guess it can be summarized by maybe the relationships that have been created or are created in Manitou Springs are very, very strong and very important. And so, because of my living there, and I was very fortunate that I was able to live there and develop my relationships in the community of Manitou Springs, I was able to bring together the leadership of the community, from the city council, from the school district, from the Chamber of Commerce, from the business community, the faith community, and we brought them all together in October 2004 for a conference to talk about restorative justice. And it was great. We had about 22 people, all of the key leaders from all of the key places, leadership places in the community came together. And we explained the differences between restorative process and retributive process. Do we want to punish? Do we want to heal? Do we want to give the victim an opportunity to be part of the process and to contribute to the outcome, if you will? Or do we want to ignore the victim? Do we want the community to be recognized as part of what has been harmed after an offense or a dispute? Or do we want to ignore the impact that it's had on the community? And we looked at those differences, and we went through a few role-playing or a few examples. And then at the end of the conference, we asked the leaders of the community, should Manitou Springs become a restorative justice community? Overwhelmingly, they said yes. That's the way we want our community to be. We want to strengthen the relationships that are already wonderful in our community, but sometimes they're impacted. And sometimes when there's an offense, when there's a dispute, the relationships have difficulty, they have problems. So what can we do to restore those relationships? And restorative justice provides an opportunity, and I think the community leaders recognize that. It provided an opportunity to restore those relationships. And so very quickly, we developed a set of principles, 9 or 10 principles. I wouldn't say that we developed them from scratch. We were fortunate in that we had other communities that had done this, and so we crafted some principles that felt right for us. Crafted a vision statement, a mission statement, and it took us maybe 4 to 6 months to do that. It was a long time, but it was very well worth spending the time to get the foundation, if you will. We decided that if we can agree to some principles, then we can kind of guide everything we do based upon whether we're meeting those principles or not. So back in the end of 2004, beginning of 2005, our school district, our board of directors of our school district, adopted these principles, restorative justice principles. Shortly thereafter, our city council adopted these principles. Shortly after that, our Chamber of Commerce adopted these principles. Our Business Improvement District adopted these principles. And we formed a Manitou Springs Restorative Justice Council to be the holder of the container of these principles, to make sure that we then kept them in mind when we had offenses and disputes and conflicts. And so we developed a process through our school district where if there were offenses, violation of rules or interpersonal difficulties, that the principal of the school district would refer the situation to the Manitou Springs Restorative Justice Council. We would provide a facilitator, and we would hold a circle, a facilitation, and we would, generally speaking, in 98% of the cases, we would resolve the dispute. We would oftentimes, and as part of the process, we would bring in community members, we would bring in peers, so if it involved a teenager, we would have other teenagers there. We would have other community members who have kids in the school or who were active or part of the community. The victim could bring in their supporters. Offender could bring in his or her supporters. And they would talk about, of course, the situation, what happened, and then they would collectively, they would figure out how to repair the harm and what consequences need to happen. One of the things that we realized is that we didn't want to convey the image that we were just being soft on kids, that this was a touchy-feely thing. Because there were some members of the community that said we have to punish, if a kid does something wrong, we've got to punish them. And most of us, of course, in the restorative area feel that, well, punishment isn't necessarily what we want. We want consequences. We want them to take responsibility for what they did. We want them to acknowledge what they did and take responsibility for repairing the harm that they did. And so what usually happens is in this circle, the group will come up with what consequences need to be done. For instance, if it's a vandalism, an offense that some young person vandalized someone, they'll need to go down and they'll need to clean it up. They might need to be involved in cleaning up other people's vandalism or graffiti or those kinds of things. And there's some logical connection to what they did, and they can also see the benefit that they're giving back to the community. They have an opportunity to listen to a community member who says, I don't want to live next to a house that's been vandalized. That affects me. It affects my property values. It affects everything that I do around my house, and so I don't appreciate when you do that. And when that person, the offender, has to sit there and listen and look eye to eye to someone that's been impacted, the general experience is that the offender, generally speaking, won't do it again. Because there's a human face and there's a consequence, a human consequence, that they now realize to their actions. In the traditional process, and this is nothing new for those involved in the traditional legal process, a slap on the hand is usually what kids get. Or maybe they get a fine, maybe they have to do some community service, but rarely do they have to sit down and meet the person that they've harmed. And it makes a tremendous amount of difference. So our school district has been implementing it. Our court system started implementing it as well for both traffic offenses. We do it for a whole host of municipal offenses. We've done it even obstructing a police officer offense. And you would think, well, how does that fit into a restorative practice? And just a quick example, I was involved in a conference where the police came to arrest, I believe it was 18-year-old son, and the father was outraged that the police would do this. What are you doing? And he just wanted an explanation. He got upset about things. He didn't want his son to be taken off to jail, and so he got upset, and eventually the police filed a charge on him for obstructing a police officer. And he was just beside himself. That's the first time that's ever happened to him, and didn't know what to do. And our prosecutor and our judge said, well, let's try to have a restorative practice with this. And so we had the police officer there, we had the father there, we had the son there, we had other community members there, and one of the things that happened is the police officer had an opportunity to tell the father about how fearful they are when they walk into someone's house, and the risks that they take when they walk into someone's house, and the fact that maybe there's someone standing behind something with a gun just wanting to take them down. So their guard is really up, and they have a heightened sense of awareness, and sometimes maybe even some fear involved. And the father said, I never thought of it that way. It's my house. I know there's nobody in my house with a gun or doing anything like that, but I never really looked at it from your perspective. And it gave them an opportunity to talk about that. And the police officer said, if it was my son, I can see how you could be upset about that. I'd be upset if the police were taking my son away too. Probably I would have appreciated if you had expressed it a little bit differently, but I can see how you'd be upset about that. And the father, as part of the consequence, wrote a letter to the police department and the community talking about the benefits and praising the police department for what they do and how they do it. And as a result, the charge was dropped, and they shook hands and off they went.